So in speaking to the question about HIV/AIDS and the Anglican Church in Australia, I want to come from the big picture and work my way down to the small picture. So the Anglican Church, when the Anglican Church picked up the issue of HIV/AIDS back in the late 1980s, early 90s, it was under the leadership of the Archbishop of Cape Town, and I'm not going to try and say his name, but the worldwide meeting of prime bishops empowered him and gave him some funds to put together a strategy for an approach towards HIV/AIDS. And we've seen in Carol's work already, and we already know from the media just how huge HIV/AIDS in Africa is. So they came to a few conclusions, all of which are obvious and all of which we probably know already. The pandemic affects every region of the world, some more than others. It affects poorer nations already weakened by the burden of debt, and they most need our support. That's just a nice picture that I have of the African leaders. The Archbishop of Cape Town is the one in the middle. And then they produced this statement. And I thought that this was a really important place to start, because the Anglican Church worldwide has held this position that we call for an end to silence about the disease, the silence of stigma, the silence of denial, and the silence of fear. They used those words in the statement that they produced in the late 1990s, which is the same language that we've used in the paper that we've put together for today. So we confess that the Church has been complicit in this silence. So in the early years, the Church was silent about the work about HIV/AIDS. We've raised our voices in the past in condemnation. We've condemned people who are gay. We've condemned people. We've blamed them. We've said it's your fault. But now we wish to make it clear that HIV/AIDS is not a punishment from God, that our Christian faith compels us to accept that all persons, including those who are living with HIV/AIDS, are made in the image of God and are children of God. We're called to walk with all who are affected by this disease, to offer support, compassion, and to bring the Christian message of love, forgiveness and hope to the world. So the basis on which we work is that this disease is a disease of people, and they need support, care, and we need to find a way forward. So we have a solemn duty to speak a word to the world on the scale of the crisis, and we wish to encourage collective action with governments and non-governmental organisations and people of goodwill across the world. The Anglican Church has been working with government and non-government organisations, beginning in South Africa and working up through sub-Saharan Africa, particularly in the countries which were part of the old British Commonwealth. So beginning in South Africa and then working up through Tanzania, Uganda, Kenya, Rwanda, and up all through that sub-Saharan African, East African side. So the Council of Anglican Provinces in Africa produced this kind of insight, which has been taken up by Anglican churches around the world, that information alone cannot save lives, but action can. So the first step, as Carol already mentioned, was knowing one's status. And it's amazing, isn't it, that people find their way to Australia. They're tested and they test positive. And that's been a huge push. One of the visions that came out of the Archbishop of South Africa's paper was that someone should be able to go to the cathedral, mind you, not just some suburban church, but go to the cathedral, be tested and be offered support. Be tested, be provided with the appropriate drugs, antiretrovirals, and be placed in a support network. So beginning with counselling and testing that should be available to all people, including those in the church. And he saw it as a vision that it's not impossible, in fact, that it should be likely that someone could find that testing right here at home. Specific behaviours can, of course, save lives, and I love this statement that the stigma itself is the sin. Stigma is the silent killer. Our brothers and sisters living with AIDS experience silence and rejection, and silence feeds denial and shame. I put this slide in just because I wanted to highlight the impact, particularly in Africa and people of African origin, of AIDS amongst women. But it's also a problem across, well, I know that it's a problem in PNG and in other parts of Polynesia, that the AIDS virus and amongst women. So they produced these little, a few little more statements. Saving our children. Every minute of every day, a child dies in Africa from the effects of AIDS, and every hour 400 teenagers become HIV infected. AIDS is stealing our future. That's a huge statement about the impact of AIDS in Africa. Our church, I like this, our church is not in the business of judgment. The judgment belongs to God. We actually believe in a God of love, and we're called as a church to be mirrors of God's mercy and heralds of God's compassion. Churches are places where love, acceptance and hope ought to abound, and not rejection and denial. So, in various ways, the Australian church has engaged, but the places that I know it is engaged is overseas. So the first thing I knew about the work of the Anglican Church was what they were doing in Africa, and then the second thing what I knew about was the work of the Anglican Board of Mission working in PNG. You would have noticed in Carol's statistics that of the 53,000 people who are HIV positive in this region, 25,000 are in Australia. Where are the other 27 or 8,000 people? Most of them are in PNG, and the proportion of people in PNG is the statistical, between male men and women is much the same as it is in Africa, with a rising rate of HIV amongst women. So the Anglican Church worked through with AusAid, and I've got to say it wasn't just the Anglican Church, it was the major churches operating in PNG. So that was the Catholics, the Anglicans, the Lutherans, and several others, the United Church of Christ and various ones. And worked with the PNG Sana Wantam program to enable church programs on HIV and AIDS. So again, taking the whole thing of testing into churches and trying to prevent the silence, trying to get drugs and antiretroviral treatments available to people, conducting HIV education and awareness programs, focusing on church leaders,